great pleasure to be here today and an honor to moderate this panel featuring such an all-star lineup. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists, starting from my right, your left to right. We start with Simon Weimer, raw materials strategy and risk management expert at BMW. Rahim Suleman, who is CEO of Nello Materials. Julia Poliscanova, who is Senior Director at Transport and Environment. Martin Phillips, CEO at Talga. Roland Chavasse, Secretary General and co-founder of Lithium Association. And Nello, Global Manager Materials for Electrification at Stellantis. We are going to discuss a wide range of topics today and also get into some of the questions that we just saw on the screen. The Critical Materials Act, obviously, so far, not really living up to the expectations, at least from the audience in the room. So I'd like to get started on talking with you folks about what actions has the automotive industry undertaken to address the challenges related to the sourcing and management of critical raw materials, including measures to mitigate cost disparities, promote local sourcing, facilitate recycling, and attract private investment. And we're going to start the answers off with Simon down on the end.
Thanks, Doug, for the question. Interesting results, by the way, especially product passports and battery passports. But let me start with a more general introduction. So as you all know, digitalization, decarbonization, and volatile geopolitics increase complexity of raw materials procurement, and of course increased complexity of raw materials management at BMW Group. And for this reason, we have optimized our approach to tackling these challenges. Our declared goal is to ensure responsible sourcing and processing of raw materials and to create resilient supply chains. How can we achieve this goal? We follow a two-step approach. First, we analyze our raw materials portfolio to create transparency about raw material-related risks. This portfolio analysis takes a holistic approach and includes an assessment of ESG-related availability, so supply, demand, and price risks. And second, we derive appropriate measures to mitigate identified risks. We use several measures, maybe two examples. We buy raw materials directly and provide these materials to our suppliers. We do this to create or to increase transparency in the supply chain, and we do it for lithium and cobalt. And to secure raw material prices, we hedge individual raw materials on the financial market. And so in total, we have a quite proactive approach which allows us to react quickly to potential changes in the raw materials market. So that's what we do to support responsible sourcing and to mitigate risks in the supply chain.
Thank you, Simon. And Nello, I'd like to jump to you so we stay on the automotive theme with what you guys are doing in these areas in the management of the critical raw materials, mitigating the cost disparities, promoting local sourcing, as well as facilitating recycling and attracting private investment.
Yes, so first of all, good morning to everybody. Yes, so in Stellantis, how we answer to critical raw material. Basically, first we change our company. So we organize, we build up a new department named SRM, Sustainable Raw Material. So this is exactly why we answer to this new challenge. And in this new team, we merge not only commodities, purchasing, and strategic business, but also technical team. Because we want, we believe that we have to manage directly the raw material topics. Because we have to assure, obviously, the best cost, we have to assure the sustainability, and for that, we have to be part to the critical, the raw material market. I told you cost, I told you change in organization, because Stellantis believe in the collaboration with the old value chain, because we have to assure the cost of our vehicle, but we have to assure also the efficiency and the quality of the material and the components, and we have to do these things only by collaboration, by reinforce the collaboration at the old value chain.
And Julia, I'd love to get your perspective now. We've heard from the automotive representatives, and I know that you have no problem kind of giving them a nudge every once in a while when you think they might need a little bit of movement in a different direction. So I'd love to have your feedback on this question.
Yes, thanks. Thanks a lot for the question, the opportunity to be here as well today. For those of you that know T&E know very well that we have worked on automotive or pushing automotive to be better for the past 30 years. So it's really our bread and butter. But for the discussion today, responsible sourcing is really something where the automotive industry with their cloud, volume, connections and partnerships have a critical role to play. A few months ago, we actually looked into the preparedness of car makers to sourcing all the battery minerals, so lithium, nickel, cobalt, that they need for their 2030 electric vehicle commitments. And what we saw is that so far, based on the data that we have seen and have been given, only a fifth of those battery materials have been secured. 2030 is tomorrow, right, in these terms. What we also saw is that German brands actually lead on sustainability, so that was an interesting finding. And brands such as Stellantis, Renault, Volkswagen do a lot to secure long-term commitments. So some progress is being made, but it's really, really not enough. So if I can mention just three very briefly areas where we see the role of automotive and what they can really do. Number one, especially from our perspective here, talking about resilience and local sourcing, European automakers have a huge role to play to help European onshoring efforts. A few days ago, we published a report where we show that the battery value chain, which is fully onshored in Europe, would save more than a third of CO2 compared to a China-controlled supply chain. This is on European average grid. If we do renewables, it's double that. Because of the volumes involved, we're talking about the equivalent of emissions to the entire country of Czechia. So it's not unsubstantial, right? And there is such a big role for car makers to, for example, do direct equity investments, partnerships, just provide firm offtakes to those nascent European companies, because sometimes it's just so hard when you're just starting to get there compared to a commercial established value chain somewhere else. So that is really important. Number two, car makers have a huge role in influencing and ensuring that the supply chains are clean, sustainable, and responsible. There we talk about procurement policies, we talk about due diligence, we talk about responsible contracting, which is a really interesting new concept, which has been pioneered in the garment industry, because what you often see is that everyone kind of passes on the problem down the value chain, and the last final supplier in a global south country without much effort is just hiding. What can they do? They can't solve the world problems. So responsible contracting offers that sharing of responsibility and working together across the supply chain. And finally, there's just simply a lot that car makers can do to influence and work directly with raw material or mining companies. If you're a big OEM, for example, Stellantis or Volkswagen, you can simply bump them up to your tier one supplier and work with them directly, and you're buying from them. You have the power. If you have someone who is more niche, maybe Volvo Cars, just an example, right? So you have different types of volume. You can simply join really good international certification schemes, for example, IRMA, Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, and that's how you can signal your wish and desire to secure responsibly sourced materials. So a lot can be done. We're not there yet, but I think in the coming years, I hope to see a lot more action from automakers in this important field.
Thank you, Julia. And Rahim, you're right there at the front of this, ground zero for this relationship. Could you give us some of your feedback on the questions? How are we doing, and what more can be done?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think first it's important to acknowledge the good work that has been done. And I think the EU has been instrumental in that, and the EIT, and IRMA, and all the efforts. And you can see this most manifest, of course, in all of the work and all of the progress that has been done with respect to batteries. I think it is the greatest sense of industrial policy that the Western world has seen in a tremendously long time. And I congratulate those who are really deeply involved in changing the landscape. Certainly more is to be done there, but I think the landscape is clearly changing. But there are many other segments that need to be addressed. And our focus, and there's probably 4 or 5 other companies here that have a similar focus in focusing on the rare earth magnets. And the rare earth magnets is, of course, what drives the traction motor and the e-motors of a vehicle. I don't know that we see the same level of urgency in that area, but I think that when we look at the issues around batteries, they are huge in dollars. There is a certain amount of geographic concentration, and there's a risk to access materials. When we look at the world of rare earth magnets, it's a slightly different problem. And the problem, I think, creates a much greater urgency, which is to say, in short, that one region of the world produces 92% of the rare earth magnets today. So when you think about that level of risk, of what that means to a supply chain, what that means geopolitically, what that means for local infrastructure, and in a number of different areas, I think that the overall industry is still challenged. But I don't think being challenged should take away from the great work that has been done with respect to creating awareness, with respect to the Battery Alliance. And I think the things will follow. I think the question in front of us is at what pace and how are we going to manage the risks to get there?
And Martin, I'd like you to pick up at the baton from there because you are also right there at the center of this discussion. How would you answer the question?
Yeah, we are, Doug. Well, we're based up in Sweden. I don't think sustainability of anode or cathode materials are in question where we're located. We're 100% renewable. We're in the scale-up phase, so what the automobile industry are, I think, doing very well in terms of engaging with suppliers like us. They've been setting up procurement processes with M&A teams. They've been setting up commercial teams that are able to deal with both, able to have a discussion on an equity or a financing basis as well as on offtakes. These are the key instruments that we need. Talga has a European Investment Bank credit approval, well, an approval for 150 million euro. What's needed are offtakes. So financing is there for the raw materials sector once you're at that stage of permitting and at the stage of production that we are. And to get to 2027 startup, it's a very, very critical point for us to be able to get an automobile offtake agreement. Now, I think the second thing for me is they are doing offtakes. Lithium, cobalt has been mentioned. What we're seeing in graphite on the anode side is a sudden turn, and it comes down to disruption because of the China problem of anode. In fact, that 95% is still coming through China as a processing facility. So the last 6 months, we've seen a sudden change. So there is a prioritization process that all the automobile manufacturers are working through. I really see it. It comes down to their own price risks. It comes down to disruption risk, and I think they're the key drivers. I do see, yes, that we talk about ESG, yes, they like the sustainability, and these are important, but there's a longer term view around those, and right now the short term requirement is really this cost disparity between what's coming in from China and what's available as a project that needs to be financed and has an impost in a sense that you need to fund a capital investment to build that supply chain. So, and Julie is, I think, very clear into how to fund that supply chain. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing, other regional, so the automobiles are really sourcing other regions at the moment. There's more critical deadlines associated with maybe sourcing for the US manufacturing plants. And what's happening is that the Chinese are now diverting most of their supply into Europe because that's really the only safe ground they have. And that has really created, I think, an issue for new projects being able to get up. So you have to recognize that. Trying to do deals in Europe, you've got this cost disparity and there's this competitiveness requirement to actually, okay, we like all of your good things, you like your sustainability, but can you still meet the price we're currently paying for Chinese material? So that's the difficulty I see at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a topic we're going to be exploring a little bit more during the course of this discussion is the price. I mean, again, the motivation is there, but getting across the goal line is a big difference if your price is too high. And Roland, would love your feedback on this question, on how things are progressing in this area.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you to everyone here for lending us your time this wet Brussels morning. You're quite right, the price ultimately is what determines things. And I think only a few days ago we all saw President Biden in the US slap a very modest 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicle imports. Whether Europe does something similar in time for the next shipment of BYD cars on the BYD Explorer ship, time will tell. Who am I? Good point. My name is Roland Chavasse. I run the International Lithium Association. We're the global trade organization for the lithium value chain. We've got about 70 members who produce about 90% of current global lithium output. We are not a European organization, we are a global organization, and we have about 20% of our members here in Europe, 20% in North America, 20% in Australia, 20% in China, and the balance elsewhere. We're not political, and we talk to anyone or everyone who talks to us. We are perhaps alone on this panel able to comment on the Chinese auto industry and what they've been doing to secure raw materials, as well as the European auto industry and what they've been doing. We'll come back to that later, I guess. Mm-hmm. We face a global challenge, and if I might just echo David Rose, who here in the room has got a car which is either a hybrid or fully electric? Doesn't have to be your only car, just a car which is hybrid or fully electric. Come on, nice and high, nice and high. Be proud. Okay, that's about 10%. Whose next car will be electric or hybrid?
Who knows?
That's a bit better, but there's some die-hard petrol heads out there.
Or maybe people not using cars.
Yeah.
Who here doesn't have a car? Hey.
Oh, well. Good point.
The greenest option of all.
Okay.
The greenest option of all.
Next question will be about electric bikes, I would imagine. Okay, sorry. Don't want to divert you.
So I should have started with that quite right. To stick with Julia's earlier comment, the car industry does have an absolutely essential role to play. I mean, it's one of the most impactful areas where we can change relatively easily. We all need to move, and moving electrically is something which is not impossible. The question really, as you say, Doug, comes down to cost. Can we, in Europe, and I'll just speak personally for a moment as a European, can we in Europe afford to compete with a already established, extremely strong and efficient automotive value chain in China? I hope so. America seems to think it can't, which is why it's got this huge wall around it. It seems to like walls whenever there's a problem, just chuck a wall up. I think that the real risk here, and this putting back on my Elia hat, the real risk is we've got to avoid a race to the bottom. Cost is not everything. If we do things at the absolute lowest cost, we will inevitably screw things up. Corners will get cut, things will just get done quickly, dirty. We only have to look at certain commodities in the Congo to appreciate that child labor, while cheap, is not the answer to a responsible value chain. And I recognize BMW's efforts to remove that from your value chain. That was very forward-thinking. Protection is needed. The CRMA, and I do apologize, I've slightly gone off track, but the CRMA, it doesn't really go far enough, as I think 94% of the people in this room agree. Maybe a little bit of protectionism, maybe that's what's needed, just to give the car makers that little margin so they can afford to pay the little extra bit for sustainable, responsible production, keeping it high quality, industrial, done to the best possible standards, and not a race to the bottom.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that, Roland, because it leads us very nicely into our next question, which is how has the Critical Raw Materials Act influenced the automotive industry's approach to addressing sourcing challenges? I'd like to start with Julia on that question.
Yes, thanks for this question, Doug. I don't think you will like my answer because so Critical Raw Materials Act is critical, and many of you will know how much we worked on that. And I know you discussed it yesterday, but we think the priority now should be to really speedily select and implement strategic projects across Europe. But it's largely a framework for supply. When it comes to automotive, I do not believe this is the most important or influential piece of legislation. In fact, here, the most important piece of legislation that we do have in Europe is the new battery regulation, most notably the environmental and human rights due diligence rules. And I know many people said they were not so familiar. So due diligence, for those of you that don't know, you know financial due diligence probably. But here we are talking about a clear 5-step approach designated by OECD and United Nations on how to trace, find the problems in your supply chain and address and mitigate them based on key risks, child labor, human rights, environmental risks, water waste, you name it. So it's a really, really important piece of this puzzle, and we're just beginning to implement it. We're just at the beginning to be implementing this due diligence across the supply chain. And here it's so important that we don't just see this as a traceability IT exercise. It's not what it is. It's about engaging with your suppliers. And I do not agree that we should be disengaging from places like Congo. We should be engaging, formalizing, and scaling responsible artisanal mining there, and many projects exist. When it's not possible, yes, we should disengage, and you all know the example that I have in mind. But ultimately, it's about working together with suppliers to mitigate and improve the risks, helping them with new technology, new practices to work with communities. There's many aspects here. But what Europe will do with its due diligence framework will really make or break whether or not automotive is actually successful in responsible supply chains.
Okay, and Martin, how has the CRMA influenced the automotive industry's approach? Love your feedback.
I don't think you like my answer either. So I think the CRMA is a regulatory watch, I guess, by the automakers. They certainly have a watch on it, but as I say, they don't see any bite or any teeth that will cause them to reprioritize their current critical sourcing issues, which are primarily the US. I do think CRMA, in fact, has, if anything, probably enhanced the ability for China to come into Europe. That we see Hungary and locations where there is a concentration now of more and more of the building of capacity to meet, say, the 40%, but they are still maintaining supply chains back through their previous businesses that they were running out of China or Japan or Korea. So these supply chains are not changing. So this 65% balance between what should now be the target for going from, say, in the case of anode, 95% now to bring it to 65% as a rebalancing, a localization is, to be frank, laughable. It can't be done at the moment. I don't think the CRMA is able to make any supply-demand adjustments. It's economics that drives decision-making, And unless there is some sort of a sustainable measure associated with a CO2 or life cycle analysis tax related to the battery passport, unless there's some credit system where an automaker is incentivized to get to that 65% rebalancing, and that actually flows down into their supply chains, unless those sorts of policies and procedures, I don't want to be too prescriptive in what needs to change, but the CRMA, to me, to select certain strategic projects as put them out in front, on an ad hoc basis, on a case-by-case basis, doesn't fix the problem. You have to look at the global aspect of where supply chains are being pushed, and I guess more of a whole of Europe, I think, approach to how to protect, if you like, but also move the needle a little bit away so we can get to 65%.
Okay. And Roland, could we get your view on the CRMA?
You might like my answer. You might.
I'm non-denominational in this discussion, so I like all your answers.
I mean, I think it's a mistake to only look at the Critical Raw Materials Act, because it's not the only one governing the situation, as you point out, Julia. You've got the battery regulation, which is huge. You've also got conflict minerals regulations, which cover certain of the battery minerals. And you've got the waste directive, which obviously has a huge impact in terms of the recycling secondary material, feeding back into the battery regulation, feeding back into the CRMA. And as if this cornucopia of regulations was not enough. Oh, I've got to tell you this. Okay, so I was having lunch with the Minister of Economy at a country in Europe which is east of the Danube. And we were talking about this subject, and it got a bit heated. We didn't have any wine with lunch. It was just a warm day in summer, and the air conditioning was broken. And he said, look, what you've got to understand, Roland, what you've got to understand is that the Chinese have got all the technology, and the Americans have got all the money. This was just after the IRA came out. And he goes, what do we have in Europe? We've got the bloody regulations. And I was like, well, okay. I can't help you there. The other regulation which I wanted to mention is the Risk Assessment Committee of, and I'd be very interested to know who in the room has heard of this. The Risk Assessment Committee of the European Chemicals Agency has, in the last 4 weeks, reconfirmed their initial idea that lithium is as toxic as rat poison and mercury, arsenic, hexavalent chrome, all those lovely things. Who here knows that? Can we just have a quick show of hands, please? Okay.
News to the audience.
That's about 7 or 8 people. And this is despite lithium carbonate being taken by literally 1 million people every day as medicine. Under medical supervision. I mean, don't take it at home, please. Check with your doctor first. It does enormous benefit to people with severe mental health challenges, and taken safely, it is perfectly good for them. And yet, the European Chemicals Agency is going to reclassify it as Category 1A. Now, what this means in the European context is that suddenly, all of the mines, lithium mines, all of the lithium refineries, all of the recycling plants, but not the battery plants, because they will already be compliant because of the toxicity associated with nickel and cobalt. They suddenly have to have a much higher level of worker protection, the highest, and this adds cost and time and everything, and it's just really yet another piece of regulation. We actually had an interview with Mario Draghi's office a couple of weeks ago. He reached out to many different industry associations and he said, can you give us examples of how Europe is over-regulating? This was through CEFIC, the Chemicals Association. And we said, yes, here's a classic one. And what makes it kind of classic is because while within Europe, within geographical Europe, we're very good at talking to ourselves. Outside of geographical Europe, the Argentinians, the Chileans, the Australians, the Canadians, the Americans, and the British have all written to the European Chemicals Agency saying, guys, we love you, but what are you doing? You know, it's really difficult, I think. Really difficult in Europe.
And Nello, love to get your view. We've heard quite a mix of views on how the automotive industry is doing to address the sourcing and the CRMA. What is your feedback on that question?
Yes. So as they explained, so there is plenty of regulation that we have to follow. And we have to follow, we must follow, because we believe in safe, healthy production. And these help us to achieve exactly this target. We cannot produce something that is not healthy, or we could discover in the future that can be dangerous for our worker and for the people. So how to answer, how to move forward? Basically, we believe in two main targets, two main goals. One is the increase our competence, increase our technical skill. And second one, develop a new collaboration and reinforce the value chain. So for the first one, keep in mind the electrical vehicle. The electrical vehicle is more similar to mobile phone than traditional combustion engine. So this means that internally we have to change. There is a drastic needs of new standard in new material. There is a drastic needs of electrochemistry skill. So this means that we are forcing to move to a new company or new competence internally, just to answer to these questions, just to speed up the development of our product and to assure the performances of the product and our vehicle. The second point is the collaboration, as I told you. So Stellantis, you know, we are signing up some deal with raw material provider, raw material supplier, because we wanted to be, so at the moment we are at the beginning, at the end of the value chain, because we are the car maker and we are at the same time at the beginning. But why? This is obviously to avoid shortage in the future. We want to avoid completely the problem that we had in the past for semiconductor. And so we have to assure and we have to securize the material. But at the same time, this short circuit in the value chain force us to increase the collaboration, not only at the beginning, at the end, but also in the middle. Because don't forget that we can extract the raw material, we can have the final electrical vehicle, but in between, we are different supplier, different company that transform the raw material in order to achieve the performance that we want.
Thank you, Nello. And Rahim, how has the CRMA influenced the automotive industry's approach to addressing?
Yeah, again, I think at this point in the early innings here, it is just about awareness, as we have not yet achieved the dynamics of urgency. But to the point that you were making, I guess I'd say a couple of things. One is, I think the downstream is ready. The piece that exists in the middle of what you talked about in terms of resources and creating finished goods. I think that the folks that are sitting in the middle, in the midstream, and the downstream are aware that this is a problem. They're focused on the things that need to have happen in order for us to get there. And they have the sense of risk and urgency that are necessary to succeed there. But I think our two esteemed colleagues from the OEMs feel a little bit of pressure under the collar as well, because cost is a dynamic. And we can't get away from cost as a dynamic. It's a dynamic at the upstream level, it's a dynamic in the value add portion in the middle, and it's a dynamic for the OEM trying to sell the vehicle. So a simple statement of we need to support all the industries in the middle have to be kind of thought within the lens of every player within that industry. And I think the way to approach it is a couple of fold. So first of all, as we think about the implementation of the Act, and you've said today that the goal is thinking about how do we actually put these things into use. I think we need to think about it by critical material, and we need to think about it by value stream. And we need to understand both in terms of risk and cost and likelihood of execution of what we can get done and what we can get done quickly. And I've said, focusing on permanent magnets, I mentioned earlier, 92% of those magnets are made in China. And what we're seeing is we are seeing an escalation in the value add, an escalation in regulation, and honestly, an escalation of control of that material going through the process. And from NIO's perspective, we actually don't use the word of the China problem or ex-China or anything of the sort. We simply talk about geographic diversity. And I think that this is what we need to think about as the things that are most important. And when we talk about what we're buying now and what is the cost, if we're treating this like a commodity, then I think we're destined to fail. Because if we're treating this like a commodity, we would be, and we want to do this in Europe, we would be doing it already. But what we're buying in this circumstance is we are buying capacity, we are buying infrastructure, we are buying technology, because that technology, as you said, is highly based in a single jurisdiction in the world. We are buying resiliency, and we're buying geodiversity. And those things need to matter, and they need to matter up front, and they need to get into the planning cycles. And it is part of responsible sourcing that the OEMs do think about. But the way that we need to approach this, I think, is, as I said, within specific chains, because within the rare earth permanent magnet phase, we're building a permanent magnet facility. There's folks, Caristors here, they're doing recycling in that space. LCM's here, and they're doing metal making in that space. There are lots of folks that are ready to make commitments that we will stand behind, and we will provide the capability and the ability to succeed at meeting the European Critical Raw Materials Act. But it is a joint effort. Cost is an issue. And when we think about that issue of pure cost, again, getting away from the benefits and the risks that we talk about, the issue that if it's going to come down to a commodity cost dynamic, we choose to live in a social world. We choose to live in a world where we have social responsibilities to other people within our society. And when we talk about that and we think about working hours in Europe, 35, 45 hours a week, and we compare it to China that are working 70 hours a week. And we talk about social responsibilities in terms of a living wage, and we're comparing that to a society that still has some elements of their business that work on piece price type dynamics. We talk about time away from work, 30 days a year compared to 10 days a year. This is a dynamic that we have chosen to live with, right? We've said this is in the benefit of society, but it is a complete misunderstanding to think that these things don't come with cost. It's not about effectiveness. It's not about efficiency. It's not about our technology. It's not about how smart we are and how committed we are. It's the playing field is not level. So we've made these choices socially. The industrial base, every supplier in the industrial base, including ourselves, including the OEMs, including everyone, makes decisions which says we have to be competitive in the universe. So if there is no other dynamic to create a level playing field for competitiveness, and it's just about cost, we're going to be where we are. In fact, we're going to be worse. Because the trend is happening. We are seeing it. We have operations in China. We make rare earth magnetics in China as well. We are seeing a trend of motor integration going more and more to China. Every element of the value chain is moving. China enacted regulations in December of 2023 to restrict the transfer of all magnetic technology outside of China. This is something that is happening. It's happening with urgency, and we need to decide as a society what we're going to do. And if all we're going to do is treat it like we're paying for a commodity, I fear for what we will actually achieve. But I will tell you, I believe that the supply base will be ready to succeed. We have to do it by areas of that supply base to understand both the cost, the timing, and the risk. And if you put those factors together, I think that gives us a game plan.
Okay, and Simon, we'd love to hear how BMW, after all of this information that's come in, and I like the 35-hour work week. I'm glad the media is not regulated because I'd be done by Wednesday. So, but please, Simon, take it away.
Maybe I can bring in a new perspective to go a little bit deeper into the Raw Materials Act, because we see the Critical Raw Materials Act as a solid basis for cross-sector raw materials policy in the Union. In the European Union, because, as mentioned, we have several regulations addressing raw material topics. And for us, the horizontal integration into European regulation, so battery regulation, end-of-life vehicle regulation, etc., is of central importance. But for now, it is too early to talk about concrete effects or impacts on the procurement of raw materials or our raw materials management at BMW. But we see two approaches in the CRMA as an opportunity to support responsible sourcing. That's the open approach for the recognition of alternative certification systems to prove compliance with ESG requirements, because this approach takes into account the necessary flexibility and lack of harmonization in mining standards. In the short and midterm, we need to be more flexible, and in the long term, we need a holistic and harmonized approach in the field of mining standards, because for now there are too many standards, and that could support the approach by industry, by OEMs, to roll out standardization and certification through the entire supply chain. And the second opportunity or approach is the joint purchasing mechanism, which is currently being developed by the European Commission. This mechanism offers the opportunity to establish an ESG-compliant market, an ESG-compliant raw materials market. And if we have an ESG-compliant raw materials market and we buy from this market, maybe we can reduce the delta between, we can reduce the price delta, because we are convinced that there should be only one raw materials market in the future, and that should be an ESG-compliant raw materials market. And to be honest, I was wondering why the Commission asked if we want to pay more for ESG-compliant mined raw materials, because we have want to just have one market, so there should not be the opportunity to decide whether it's an ESG-compliant mined raw material or not.
Okay, and Julia, you wanted to just quickly say something, because then I've got one more question for you folks, and we're going to have to put on our running shoes because we're getting close to running out of time.
Yes, I just wanted to react briefly to some things that was said, maybe a little bit in support of Europe. So I think we have a lot more in Europe than regulations. We have one of the largest consumer markets. Our single market is attractive, and when there is the right signal, investors come, they want to be here, and many, many countries, especially those with overcapacity, are very keen to enter our market. So I think we should be a little bit proud of that. What we do need is to make that smart regulation to work and incorporate resilience, green, ESG, etc. So it's not just the cost in the market, it's the role to access the European market. I give you an example in batteries. If Europe puts in place a really strict CO2 per kilowatt hour criteria for the access to the European market, you have created the market with not much cost. You're prioritizing local cleaner producers. You are integrating that cost so that those that maybe do it cheaper but don't meet that threshold can access the market. Same goes for green nickel. If US, Canada, Australia, Europe come together and say, we in our markets will only buy nickel at this standard. This is not a premium, it's almost the cost for those that don't meet that premium. So there's a lot we can do. One thing we should be very careful not to say, and I finish after this, is that it's up to the consumer to choose. I hear that a lot, and I really wanted to put that myth to rest. It's not up to consumer. I'm a consumer, I'm in the market for a small electric vehicle. I've made my decision. I will not say that car maker is or is not on this panel, but when I come to the dealer and I am at the very end of all the B2B decisions. So what, I don't like the battery in this car. What do I say? Oh, can you please go and change that? That's not how it works. It's really the role for governments and regulations to shape that rather than consumers.
Thank you. And again, we've got about 5 minutes left in our panel before David puts you through another sprint session. But before we go, we're here in Brussels. Have to ask the panel a question, which is, what can the EU learn from the US investment strategies to bolster its own objectives? I'm going to start with Simon. You have 30 seconds.
What can we learn from the US side? They are very ambitious. They have clear objectives. And I think that there's a need to catch up here. We need to back up our strategic approaches, our strategies with operational measures. So if we see the Mineral Security Partnership, it was launched by the US. Now the European Commission participates at the MSP Forum. So yeah, we need to, Jan Klaassen talked yesterday about the raw material fund. Maybe we will have it soon, but let's see.
Okay, Nello, what can the EU learn from the US investment strategies to bolster its objectives?
Yeah, so Stellantis is a global company. You know that we have brand in Europe, we have brand in US. So what is our policy, what is our strategy? Basically, we believe in regionalization. So this means that obviously we push for a European Commission, European countries to have the best product, the best cost, as in US, exactly for our brand that are part of US market and part of European market. So we believe in regionality in the different local developments.
Okay, Rahim?
I think first we should acknowledge that the EU is first and they're forward thinking in this dynamic, but the US has certainly changed the dynamic because of two characteristics that I think that the US brought to the table. One is that they're big, and they're powerful, and they put a lot more money at work to get this done. And two is they're decisive about doing it. And I think these are the factors that will change in terms of who is ahead in terms of getting to the goal line. I think we all want to get to the goal line, but the decisiveness of this is important and we're going to get this done has a very different feeling on the other side.
Okay, Martin.
I'm probably just drilling down a couple of policy changes that they made. Big one, foreign entity of concern, FEOC, that has shifted the goalposts completely. They definitely had an influence on the way the automobile makers are procuring and their sourcing requirements. It's completely changed it. So the FEOC tariffs that were recently announced have also now just created this urgency around what is needed. They can see it on the horizon. There's a date, there's a milestone. There's real tangible things that the procurement groups actually have to meet. And the boards, the senior people are actually chasing them as to what are they doing about it? What is their solution? What results is more sizable risk, if you like. The project risks that they're willing to take are moving, and that's good for groups who are scaling up and looking to get. So offtakes, prices are different, so there is starting to be, I think, a real move there that I think the European Commission should be considering.
Thank you. And Roland?
I'll be super quick. Coordination and unity of purpose. All too often in Brussels, it feels like one DG is battling for turf with another DG, and then you go to the regional capitals, of course, and it becomes a much more fragmented story. Just very quickly touch on Simon's point about standardization across the globe, and this actually goes to Julia's point about carbon dioxide as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the new standardized guidance on carbon footprinting from the Lithium Association, available from all good bookshops or our website. I even have a few copies with me, so if anyone wants it afterwards.
Okay, and Julia?
Yes, very briefly. I think we can learn a lot from the US in the way they organize their financial incentives to scale. Two things. First of all, how simple and predictable they are. I can easily calculate how much money I'll get if I build a battery gigafactory in the US. However, I would need an army of experts and lawyers to make submissions for European Innovation Fund or national state aid for that matter. And two, they are output-based rather than project-based. So they really focus on scale, on production, on bringing things to the market, and I think that's also very important.
Thank you very much. Great answers from the panel, but you're not quite done yet because David also has a question for you. So I'm going to swing it over to David for the wrap-up.
Thanks, Doug. Well, we've had a really wide-ranging debate here, of course, and I'm going to give you a really difficult job to do now. I'm going to give you a budget of 30 seconds each, and I want you to sum up your key takeaways, 1 or 2, just to leave with our audience to wrap up this debate. So I'm going to go left to right here. So Simon, Rahim, Julia, Martin, Roland, and Nello. So first, Simon, to you. What would be your 1 or 2 residual messages or real distillations for our audience today?
Okay, I'll keep it short and simple. So we need a holistic and harmonized approach in the field of certification and standardization, so in the European Union and worldwide. We need to develop a high ESG raw materials market, and we need a current European raw materials policy based on the Critical Raw Materials Act. And my last point, our industry does not need to be protected by the European Commission.
Okay, clear. Thanks. Rahim?
I think that if I were to repeat the key points, it would be the European Critical Raw Materials Act is a great starting point. Its key is going to be about execution. We need to think about execution according to the various dynamics within it, with a balance toward risk and cost and likelihood of success. And I think that we should give, the ability to succeed and understanding that success is not just going to be about the lowest cost, because we have to change how we think about the definition of success.
Okay, clear. Thank you, Julia.
Yes, I would say, well, first of all, nothing of this will be easy, but I would really urge everyone not to dismiss Europe in this space. 2, car makers have a huge role to play, but what I've heard today, and I do see that they are already doing a lot, so it's really about just accelerating and doing what's happening in Europe. And finally, regulation. Regulation, if it's smart, if it's clear, if it's done well, is really an asset in our market in Europe rather than a problem in itself.
Okay, thanks. Martin?
Urgency. Politically, I think to change some of the policies. So I do think there needs to be a CO2 equivalent, if you like, in terms of some form of at the border payment. It needs to be perhaps a premium. It needs to be linked to things that are important to the EU, and primarily I'd say that'd be around sustainability. I think money flowing down from autos into battery factories that need to flow down into the critical raw materials. There's a 6-year lag to build these things. You can't build them by line as a battery factory, spending capital incrementally. It is one big slug, and you need to get that in a period of 6 years. So you need an offtake, and you need big scale. Incentives and grants are there just to supplement that. They're not there to make a bad project a good one, which you hear a lot about. They're there to build that middle of the road capacity, those refining capacity, and much of that capacity has to be done at big scale. And that means we will be competitive in the EU. I'm very confident that with grants and incentives, it's getting the thing started, but we will be very competitive. I can see it.
Okay, clear. Roland?
Coordination is key. With regulations within the member states of Europe. We mustn't have a race to the bottom for the sake of the planet. And this is really something that we as the association often come across in South American communities where they host the lithium. They say, look, we're going to keep living here after you've come and taken the lithium, so we don't want you to trash it. And really that's the one planet thing. We're facing a global challenge. We need global solutions. And really, this goes beyond Europe. We all need to work together. And just one final thing. The toxicity of lithium is far from universally agreed. A quick and over-conservative solution might not be the best way forward for such a critically important raw material. And just we're not against safety. Please don't get me wrong. We strongly believe in the precautionary principle. But in the same way, when I'm sitting at home on my sofa watching Netflix, I don't have a seatbelt and I don't wear a helmet. Okay. Because although my house might collapse in an earthquake, I think it's pretty unlikely. Thank you.
So mitigated risk, indeed. And finally, Nello.
Okay, two words to finish. So first, the collaboration. We need a strong collaboration all along the value chain, starting from raw material to arrive to the final finishing, final product. This is to assure exactly what we want and what we have to produce in Europe and in other countries. The second word is a technical excellence. We need to increase our competence, our technical excellence, in order to assure the cost of our product, the standardization, because we need standardization, we need also to collaborate all together, and so we have to understand exactly what we are doing. And finally, obviously, the performances, because don't forget the performances.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we have a very big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for our panel? And for our moderator, please.